Good afternoon, everybody, and happy Global Entrepreneurship Week. It's wonderful to be with you all. Thanks for joining today's discussion. My name is Radhika Prabhu, and I serve as Executive Director of the U.S.-Pakistan Women's Council, a unique public-private partnership between Texas A&M University and the State Department accelerating women's economic advancement. This speaker series, co-hosted by the Council and U.S. Embassy, is a unique opportunity to forge connections and engage in conversation with US and Pakistan experts. Maryam and Lucy, sincere thanks for taking the time to be with us. When I first visited Pakistan in 2014, Pakistan's startup ecosystem had only two major business incubators and accelerators. It has quickly evolved since then. Before the pandemic, the IFC, International Finance Corporation, counted 24 incubators and accelerators and around 20 key investors, many of which catered to early stage startups. VC funding plays a role in seeding 22% of investments in startups, and angel investors a lot more, around 44% in Pakistan. In short, they've been critical to the growth of startups. Nonetheless, we recognize that the concentration of funds in major urban areas and additional policy challenges makes attracting VC funding very expensive. Amidst the ongoing pandemic, women starting and scaling businesses will be critical for expanding needed growth in Pakistan and countries the world over. I hope this session helps build an understanding of what it means to take on VC funding, and for those working with VCs, gives you an opportunity to ask questions and share insights. With that, I'll introduce Maryam Arshad, who has over 10 years of experience building communities of entrepreneurs, tech entrepreneurs, and business professionals. A hybrid marketer, founder, and director of Impact Dynamics, an enterprise that creates customized entrepreneurial curriculum and runs workshops on tech and soft skills. Maryam also leads Google Business Group Peshawar. Her profile extends from speaking and training to mentoring and working on business development. In other words, she does it all. She's been a speaker and a trainer at both national and international fora, namely TEDx IM Sciences, Google APAC headquarters, Open Silicon Valley, Tech Camp South Asia, among many others. Over to you, Maryam.
Thank you so much, Radhika. That was a great introduction, and I own it. And I would like everybody, over here to own what they're good at. Having said that, good evening to everybody over here, and a very warm welcome to the Entrepreneurship Series. This happens to be one of the very engaging sessions today that we will have with Lucy today. In relation to entrepreneurship, in relation to raising investment, in relation to, women entrepreneurs in particular, and the challenges and the hurdles they face, and how they stay away, through those, being, basically the rock, when it comes to building an empire, starting off small and then going big and then going places. And there's so much that comes to play, when you talk about entrepreneurship, when you talk about starting your own business, when you talk about building your profile and then gaining capital, which is essential. And, in moving forward, in steering your way forward. I have with me today another Wonder Woman over here. When I looked at her profile, I was in complete awe, to say the least. Not only because she happens to be a partner at a venture capital firm, but also because she has a decade of experience as a COO. Besides that, she has driven her past company's growth, which was, over 100 million, with a network of over 100 million, hosts and guests. And then she led her previous company, raised over 75 million in revenue, which is a huge amount. And most recently, Lucy is, running an early stage venture capital fund in New York City, with under 500 million under management. And besides that, I think she is a go-getter. And Lucy, you have it all covered, balancing this with your kids. And, I'm actually, and Lucy, I cannot wait for you to take a lead and, talk about funding, raising investment, raising capital, and how to be somebody like yourself. And please inspire us all today. Over to you.
Thank you all so much. Thank you to everyone who is doing a phenomenal job organizing this entrepreneurship speaker series. I think it's a fabulous set of conversations that you put together, and I'm really honored to be part of it. So thank you so much. And with that, why don't we dive in? Today, I'm going to talk about investment in your startup, finding it, identifying the right people, figuring out how to prepare, and to craft your story, and to close a round. And I will try and talk about that both in the first round that you are raising, as well as you're raising subsequent investment, and balance sort of those two different moments in your company's history. But let me talk a little bit more in depth about my story, so you know who you're listening to, and sort of my perspective on the world. So I started my career in venture capital right out of undergrad, which was a pretty uncommon path back in 2006, but I had the opportunity to be an analyst at a firm here in New York. And my job was to call CEOs, ask them the most intimate questions about their data, and try and convince them that they should take investment from me, a 22-year-old woman sitting in New York. And that was an incredible learning opportunity. It was really sort of baptism by fire. And I think I learned two really core things. One was to evaluate businesses really quickly and on the fly, but more importantly, I learned to swallow that pit in my stomach that no CEO should pick up my phone call, that I wasn't worth talking to, and just go for it anyway. Call them, have that conversation, try and be as helpful as possible. And sort of through that experience, learned that one, I loved the process of working with management teams, of growing companies, of being in this innovative space. And two, that if I was ever going to end up back in the venture capital world, I wanted to come back with real experience that I could offer to the management teams that I was working with. And that sort of shaped the story of my career to date. So I went on to, after a couple of years there, start a company called Paperless Post, as Maryam said. We started in the heart of the recession in 2008. We incorporated our company on the day that Lehman collapsed. We did our first seed sort of pitch during an hour in which the Dow dropped 800 points. And so suffice to say that that first fundraise was grueling and hard and about as dark as it gets. And I think it was great preparation for the rest of my career as an entrepreneur, because that is the definition of entrepreneurship. It is surviving the hard times. It is seeing the light at the end of the tunnel and just kind of steeling yourself and continuing on. And I think resilience is a huge part of the fundraising process, and it's a huge part of building companies, because it's a gift. It's thrilling. It is a privilege to be able to start and build companies, but it is hard, and it is okay to feel intimidated as you're doing it. And I want that to be a big part of what we talk about today, which is that, you know, a lot of this process is not quite knowing what you're doing the best you can, and being brave in the face of things that are hard and scary. So from Paperless Post, after a decade there, having built it to about 100 million users around the world, I decided to leave and join two entrepreneurial friends, Alexa Von Tobel and Mark Batzian, as well as a third co-partner, Penny Pritzker, who'd been the Secretary of Commerce under Obama, and also started a number of companies herself, to found Inspired Capital. And we are an early stage fund in New York. We started in 2019. We raised $200 million, which was a different type of fundraise, but challenging nonetheless, and just recently closed on our second fund. We exclusively look at seed and Series A companies, predominantly in the US and a small amount internationally. And so that's who's on the screen today. So jumping right in, why is fundraising so intimidating? I think that there's a lot of reasons it's really intimidating. You are putting yourself out there. It is a very vulnerable state to be in, and you do so in a process that is very opaque, meaning that the rules are not clearly and objectively defined. It is not always straightforward why certain investors make certain decisions. There's a whole bunch of bias built into this system. And so even if you are doing your absolute best, it doesn't always mean that the outcome is going to be clear. We as investors are unfortunately in the business of saying no. We look at thousands of companies and make about 12 investments a year. So it is, and every company that we invest in who goes on to raise more capital, even when they are growing at an incredible pace, here's no from a lot of investors down the line. So one of the predominant features of the fundraising process is hearing no. And so I want everyone to get really comfortable with the idea that you only need one yes. And you are gonna hear a lot of no's. No's don't mean that you shouldn't be doing this. No's mean that you're out there and you are putting yourself out there. And that is what is necessary for the fundraising process. And so I'm gonna try and at least unearth and try and relieve some of that opaqueness today, but I want to start by acknowledging that like the system inherently is somewhat opaque. Okay, so how do you know that you're ready to raise? If you are raising your first round of capital, I think what you need to have decided is that you are going to do this no matter what. You are 100% in. This is going to be your life's work for the next decade. This is what you want to be doing. The plan B is still doing this. And so that you know that when you are going to pitch an investor, that they are signing up with someone who is 100% committed, that you have vetted your idea up and down the stack, that it is a mission that aligns to your values, that when you wake up in 5 years, you're still going to feel really passionate and obsessed with this idea, and that you have a plan for how you're going to reach those first couple milestones that are going to give you really good signal as to whether or not it's working. If you're raising later on and you've already taken some capital or you've already started your company and you're off to the races, what we advise our companies is to start your fundraise at least 7 to 8 months in advance of when you need the money, so that you're not going out when you are in any kind of desperate situation. You want to have clearly defined when you were starting what the milestones are that we're going to give you that signal that things are working, that you can build into a narrative that will help investors understand why you believe more investment here is worthwhile. And I think those milestones both come in revenue traction and customers, but also in the advisors that you're able to bring on, in the employees that you're able to hire, the team you're able to assemble around your startup that's really going to drive it. So I don't want you to think that milestones are exclusively revenue traction. Those are very important elements as well. Okay, so how do you prepare for your fundraise? Now you've decided you're ready. Now we're going to get prepared. So you're going to identify your ideal profile for your investors, craft your narrative, develop relationships with people who can make those introductions, who will be compelled by your narrative, that are going to advocate for you, forward emails, get you in the room with the right people, build a compelling deck, put together a data room, hone your blurb. We're going to talk through every part of this and hopefully bring a little bit more structure into what it means to be prepared to fundraise. Okay, but first, like we were talking about at the beginning, you have to emotionally prepare for going into your fundraise. And I think this is an important facet of the process. There's a fellow VC here in the US who says that I think accurately, the most often an entrepreneur's greatest inhibiting factor is what they believe they're capable of. And so when you are going into your fundraise, I want you to start with really focusing on why you believe you should get this investment and why you believe that these investors are lucky to be on this journey with you. I want you to start from a place of confidence and really grounding yourself in the fact that being scared is not different than, it is okay, because being scared is essential to being brave. You're not brave if you're not doing something that is scary. So I read this quote yesterday and it really struck me, and it kind of reminded me of the topic that we're going to talk about today. And it's from Winnie the Pooh. So it is not a VC or a highly intellectual, but you're braver than you believe, stronger than you seem, and smarter than you think. And I think, to echo what Maryam said, embrace what you're good at, be proud of yourself. That is what you're going to need to project into these conversations that you're having with future investors. They want to feel that from you, and they want to know that they're getting in the boat with someone who is brave, strong, and smart. And you are at the beginning of a, as we said, intimidating, thrilling journey. You're strong to even be at the starting line, and you're smart to do this. Betting on yourself is a very, very smart thing to do. You have you're best equipped to evaluate yourself. except for you're probably harder on yourself than you should be. So just remember that as you're going through this process. Okay, so identifying the right type of investors. This is really about, is the stage of your company, the industry that you're in, the ambitions that you have for your company, does it fit with the investment profile and the dollars that someone, how they're making investment decisions? So it was wonderful to hear from Radhika about how much infusion of capital is coming into the Pakistan like startup funding environment. That is going to be an asset to all of you. When we were starting to fundraise in New York back in 2008, I think there was one seed fund and one angel group. Today, the ecosystem is really lively, and it just means that you have a lot more choice and a lot more people to talk to. And I'm really optimistic that you guys are just going to have more and more options in terms of where to seek funding and who to seek it from. But I think it's important to know, as you're going into these conversations, how these investors might be evaluating the opportunity. So if I am speaking with an angel investor and it's for my first raise, and we are talking about that, a group of angels making a $500,000 investment in my company, and let's say we're valuing the company at $5 million. They now, as a group of angels, own 10% of my company. If in a few years I sell that company for $50 million, those angels now get a return of $5 million on their investment. That is wonderful. This is their personal capital. They have 10x the money that they put into the venture. They're incredibly proud. They're aligned with you. And that works really well. If you're looking at a venture firm, and we can take Inspired Capital as an example, we have a $200 million fund. We are going to make about 25 investments across that fund. We expect that it's going to be really hard for these companies to grow to the full ambition that we seek. But when we own 10% of a company, the way we think about it from our mental model is this company, if we own 10% at the end of the day, could we return our entire fund? Could that company be worth $2 billion and return $200 million? So that's just a very different approach. And we have to believe very different things about that company and that opportunity. And also, we might be making an investment later on in that company's life cycle when there's more proof points that say we get to 2 billion, and the angels are very happy that we're now on the road to 2 billion instead of 50 million. But there's just different expectations as you move across different parts of the funding stack. Similarly, strategic investors in an industry can be very interested in the technology you're investing in a new market that you're developing, and they can have an angle that is both financial as well as industry related, and can be great partners from both a business development perspective as well as a capital perspective, because they have an interest that's coming in from a slightly different perspective. So as you're thinking about today, where my company is, which one of these categories do I align with most closely? And that will change over the life of your company as you develop more, as we were saying, proof points, traction, growth. The venture firms, the angels that you align yourself with will change. How do I think about finding these people? So one really good shorthand is to find the companies that you admire, maybe that you think you resemble. You're developing a healthcare startup. Go look at all the healthcare startups that have come along the last 5 years, and look at who's in their investor roster. Look at who's been tracking them and working with them. That's a really good target list for you to start to develop relationships with. Befriend other founders, ask who they raised from, how they went about their raise, what that process was. And it's so valuable to have a network of founders that you can bounce ideas off of around every topic building a company, but fundraising is definitely one where it's helpful to have a peek inside the door. We get a ton of our introductions to new entrepreneurs from our existing portfolio, and it's one of the best places that we find new opportunities. So to have a network of founders that may be 1 or 2 steps ahead of you is just invaluable. Attend the events, virtual and physical, held by firms, accelerators, anyone, and start to identify who you want to get to know. And don't be afraid of the cold email or cold LinkedIn. The worst thing that can happen is that they say no, or more likely there's just silence, and that's okay. I think if you're never going to get a yes to a question that you do not answer, that you do not ask, excuse me. So I think it's always good to have a warm introduction. I'm not going to say that that isn't a helpful thing, but I think sometimes we bias too much towards it, and we don't realize that people are very, very open. If you have a really nicely honed, this is why you should talk to me, and I'm only going to take 15 minutes of your time, and 15 minutes can often turn into a half an hour very, very easily. So as you've sort of honed in on what is that target list of investors, or started to kind of take shape of like, okay, I think that like my first round is probably going to be a group of angels and maybe a pre-seed firm. And now you sort of have that honed, you can move into crafting an amazing pitch. And I put those in that order because I think it's really important to make sure that you've crafted your pitch once you know who you're trying to pitch. You know what you're trying to build, but how you position it to your audience is very important, and it needs to flow with the way that they think about the world. So what does the pitch consist of? You need to tell the story of you and your team. And I just want to pause here for a second, because I think it's really important in the early days to remember that no matter how fabulous your idea is, no matter how gigantic the market is that you're going after and how disruptive you know you can be, at the end of the day, an investor is investing in you. You are the primary asset of an early stage venture. Your ambition, your intelligence, your ability to react to data, change courses, and I think so often entrepreneurs, and I certainly was incredibly guilty of this, are so obsessed with their idea that all they want to talk to the investor about is the idea and the company, where we're going to go. And we skip over why we're worth the investment. And at the end of the day, when I walk back in to talk to my team about a new company that I think we should invest in, the first thing I talk about is the founder, always, always. And if I loved the idea, but I didn't believe that the founder was obsessed, I didn't believe that they were committed to going the distance, I thought that maybe they were a founder because it sounded cool, I would be like, okay, we should look for, another founder doing this. And so I think you have to really tell your story, your background. Why are you here? Why are you doing this? And why are you going to be good at this? And you have to start with that in your narrative. And you have to keep doing that through the whole course of your company. As we look at like huge publicly traded, now $1 trillion businesses like Amazon, Bezos is still the heart and soul of that business, no matter how big it gets. The founder is the heart and soul of why this exists and why it will exist and why it will succeed. So you and your team, you are a huge part of the narrative, your market and your insights on the market. And it's specific here that I don't say the market, because you need to carve out what is the portion of the market that you're going after, and why do you think that you have developed a critical insight into what should be different about this market? What is the flaw in this market that we can correct? And why do I believe it's possible today? And then your novel approach to building that company in the space. So with Airbnb, for example, the founders brought to early angel investors listings on Craigslist that would resemble an Airbnb today, where it's like, I'm listing my apartment for 1 month. And then another set of listings that said, I'm looking for an apartment for 2 weeks in New York. Can anyone help me find this? And they said, there's this whole market that is underserved, that is emerging, that we're going to create an actual platform for. And we've identified it early. And this is where we think the world is going. And we think this is why they want to stay. They would write back to the Craigslist thing and be like, we don't have an apartment for you, but why do you want to stay in an apartment instead of a hotel? And they gathered all this data. And it was, I think at that time, a really split set of investor perspectives of like, you're crazy. Nobody wants to stay on someone else's couch. And a set of investors that said, there's something really here. And I think you have you've got an early look at a new trend and like, let's follow this, like, let's follow down a rabbit hole. So you want to gather your data points that sort of prop up your narrative, that really help you, both you are the narrative, but then you also want to say like, there's corroborating evidence that exists in the world. This is why I believe in this narrative. And then after you've sort of figured out like, okay, this is the arc of my narrative, you turn that into your deck. And you develop a deck that weaves the story together, as well as tells the brass tacks data of like, this is how much we're raising. This is where the money will go. These are the milestones that we believe that with this infusion of capital, we will be able to achieve. And when you develop the deck, you're going to do a long presentation version, and you are going to put together a short shareable version that you'll use for introductions, which is really important. So then you'll put together a data room. We'll go by this really quickly. I'm happy to share this list. But I think before you out to have conversations, put together a light version of a data room. If you're in later stages of fundraising, put it together before you go out. When you are starting conversations with investors, you don't want to be on your back foot. You don't want to be developing things and materials while you're having those discussions. If they ask for something that you don't have yet, of course, you're going to need to stay up late that night and put it together and think through how to do it. But if you can have on hand a set of materials they can dive into, that's something you want to be able to share with them the afternoon after you've spoken with them. Not like, oh, okay, you actually want to keep talking to me? Great, let me put together a data room now. You want to walk into these conversations with the assumption they're going to want to know more. Okay, this is probably the most important. Once you've developed your deck, your narrative, practice. We put our Series C $75 million into raising companies through a boot camp. They've done this before, they know their metrics cold, and still we're really obsessive about practice. Because as you go through it, find your smartest friend, give your full pitch. As you're giving the pitch, I promise you, one of our CEOs described it as an out-of-body experience. He was like, it was like I was floating outside my body and I knew everything I was doing wrong. Once I really sat down to try and do it. And so he had more comments for himself than anyone else in the room. But get your smartest friend to tell you all the ways it could be better. All the ways you should sing your own praises more at the beginning when you're talking to the person about who you are. All the ways in which you could be more convincing or compelling around why your market insight is so special. Because that, if you think you're just going to get it right in your own head and having developed a deck, you are always selling yourself short. Practice gives you that extra set of polish that allows you to deliver it in a way. I always joke that like you have to practice it so many times that it sounds incredibly natural. Like as opposed to practice so many times that it sounds really formal. It's like practice so many times that it sounds like the first time you ever did it and you're perfect. So we say go through 10 times with 10 different parties. And I know that sounds intimidating, but it's worth it. Okay, so how do you run a good process? We're going to talk about how you run a great process. You are going to, like we said, go to the events you need to go to, cold and email the people asking for advice, join accelerators, build up your network, because what your network is the key to the introductions that you need to those ideal investors that fit your profile. Take meetings with people who don't fit your ideal investor profile, because they might be the key to the right introduction. But when you're going out to try and drum up those initial set of introductions, be clear about why you're asking X for an introduction to Y, so that they can be like, I know that Lucy has done her homework. She knows that Radhika is an angel investor in startups in the healthcare space, and she sent me a blurb that fits perfectly with Radhika's past investments. I'm going to forward this email right along to her. And I don't need to do much evaluation. I think this is a place where a lot of work gets done at the last minute, but it's really important. You want to develop the blurb, your intro blurb about your company, and that short version of your deck, so you can arm the people who are your advocates to get it out there and get those introductions rolling. And I think some people think of this as a last step. I think it's one that you should be constantly thinking about. Like as you are giving the pitch and you really nail that sentence about how, like what your company is, go write it down. It should find its way into your blurb. And then what you want to do is activate those introductions in a really short period of time. Try and plan the first 5 to 10 introductory conversations within the same 2-week window. that will give you momentum. It will give you feedback. It will give you your own, criticisms and like, yes, that's what's landing. I have to make sure that I really stick, like this slide is what is really compelling to the investors. And if you have it more condensed, you will be able to build momentum along those conversations. And then follow up with the investors that you talk to, share your materials in your data room. If they've said that it's not a fit, still thank them for their time. Say that you really appreciate them spending time with you. You never know what will come back from that. It could be, yep, I'm sorry it's not a fit, but I'd love to introduce you to X. And those serendipitous moments are really important. So I think being clear that you really appreciate the time of the people that you spend time with, the advisors, the investors, can actually come back and deliver a lot to you. So I will just end by reminding all of you, you're braver than you believe, stronger than you seem, and smarter than you think. And I would love to open it up to questions and a real conversation around this, and hopefully get to the things that really matter to you guys about how to go about your first or second fundraise.
Lucy, this was indeed very insightful. I mean, so many key takeaways for all of us, and there is a flood of questions I have to say, and I'll be happy to reach out to them, to you one by one. What I personally liked out of all the great points that you mentioned is you are the primary asset, and that is so true. I mean, so many investors that I have reached out to agreed to, probably believe in my idea was because of myself. So I would. And I'm going to be loud about this because, and somebody asked, amongst the participants that how do we reach out to different investors? And I'm sure, Lucy, you would agree. You were talking about networking, and there's another concept of how you gain sponsors in the audience, like people can be your sponsors. So networking does the right trick. So without further ado, we have so many questions, Lucy, and I'll start with the first one. So the first question is, what is the situation and what are the challenges for VCs in the post-COVID world? How has it been for you?
So I think Zoom has enabled a speed of investment that is not like anything the VC world has seen before. So an investment process that might have taken 3 to 4 weeks 2 years ago is now happening over a week. And it's a drop everything world, dive into the company, to getting to know the team. And I think it's just a breakneck pace. So I think particularly for the venture firms that you're speaking with, know that they're probably more slammed and underwater than at any point in the past.
All right. Lucy, the second question that has been asked from the audience is, how do you prepare a proposal to pitch to investors?
How do I prepare? If we put our companies through 10 practice sessions, I think we put ourselves through 30 practice sessions. We honed our deck for our most recent raise over about a 3-month period. And we really believe in the thesis every time we're talking to an investor, whether it's a formal pitch or just a catch up. We are in fundraising mode. So we are constantly honing what is that narrative around inspired capital and how are we delivering it, even if it's outside of a pitch. So I think we probably put ourselves through even more paces than we do our companies.
All right. So the next question is regarding fundraising again, of course. So the participant is asking, do you need to have a physical presence, or can you do this virtually? I believe in terms of pitching to the investor. And I think that because of COVID times, that could be another reason the question popped up. Yeah.
I would say use Zoom to your advantage when possible to pitch investors that are not physically and geographically in your area. I think in person can often be really impactful in a world of a lot of Zoom pitches. So when you have the opportunity as sort of a second meeting or a follow-up, if it's available, try and be in person, try and have that, build that part of the relationship, but leverage Zoom. Talk to people you never would have been able to talk to in the past if their geography would have prohibited it and in-person was what was expected. So I think Zoom is to every advantage on the founder side.
I would definitely second you on that. And I think COVID has proved to be a great opportunity to reach out to so many international investors for that matter.
Yeah.
Yes, that's a positive to COVID.
Mm.
So, yeah,
Yeah,
especially
an investor can look at something in New York, California, India, and Pakistan all on the same day. So make sure that you're on that list.
true. Especially, I mean, as far as edtech is concerned, and as far as health is concerned, there's been a huge rise in investment, especially during COVID. So I'd encourage everyone sitting over here, I mean, in their homes actually attending this virtually, to have a chat with investors from across the globe. So the next question is that for the specific person's education sector startup, would you also recommend that startups network and collaborate with relevant industry stakeholders, which could help to take an idea from prototype testing to the development stage?
Sorry, could you just repeat that one more time? I missed a part of it.
Not a problem. So basically, what they're asking is that they're asking if you will recommend the startup, which hails from the education sectors, to collaborate with relevant industry stakeholders. Collaborate with others. I think that is what the question is, to take their idea from one stage to the other.
Yeah. I think particularly in industries like education and healthcare, collaborating with sort of the old guard is an incredibly important part of the process and pushing innovation forward. There are certain startups that are immediately at odds with their own market. You take Uber and the taxis, there's no collaboration. It is all antagonistic. So I think it's really identifying, is my disruption through the sort of incumbents, or is it at odds with the incumbents? And if it's through the incumbents, make those, I would say, like, really invest in those relationships and really align yourself and really try and make sure you understand their perspective so you can make them successful. Because if you make them feel good and look good, that is when those pilots work the best.
All right. So the next question is in regards to how to make money for your startup when you have limited resources. I think they're referring towards bootstrapping. Yeah.
I think, there's a famous quote, nobody's ever paid for something that didn't solve a problem. Really make sure you're solving a customer's problem and be willing to start at sort of the low end of the price spectrum and be able to build up. If you are in a bootstrapping environment, I think bootstrapping can be great because it can really hone in on, like, what is it that the customer wants, without sort of saying, like, well, if we build these 10 features, then maybe they'll finally start paying attention to us. So you got to hone in on what is that first feature that is really going to be the painkiller. We often look at companies and say, like, is this a painkiller or is this a vitamin? It's a lot easier to get someone to take an Advil than a daily vitamin, because when they got a headache, they want it to go away. So I think hone in on the painkiller and figure out, like, that minimum viable first feature that you can get money in the door for.
Right. The next one I actually really like. Which platforms would you recommend to use when looking for investors?
So I think Crunchbase is a great place to go to sort of, like I said, do that forensics on, like, okay, what are the companies that I like? Who is actually in their cap table? What kind of check sizes do they write? Look at the companies and then go to the investors and look at sort of what the investors, at least published recent investments are. Read TechCrunch, read sort of your local tech and funding announcement. Not to get annoyed and frustrated that other people are raising money, which is certainly possible, but to kind of have it in the back of your mind, like, what is the state of affairs? What is the pace of capital being deployed? And how should I think about that? And then as a great place to say, like, oh, that's a name I haven't heard of before. I didn't know they had a venture arm as part of that company. I should try and figure out how to get that. So you want, like, both passive inputs where you could learn things on a daily basis, those newsletters, and then proactive PitchBook, Crunchbase. I was going on Crunchbase yesterday and just looking at the investors and then filtering by those who've made investments in Pakistan and saying, like, okay, here's a list of 42 angels that have been active in Pakistan. Let me go through and see what they've been investing in. And a lot of times this is a stalking kind of feels stalkerish, but like it's a good thing to do. And people will like it if you reach out to them and say, you made an investment in X, Y, and Z. Therefore, I think you might be interested in my company. That's a great way to start an email.
I definitely agree. And I think most of the times, we hesitate in reaching out to people for no good reason, as you rightly pointed out in your during your presentation as well. So I think it's all about taking the lead, reaching out. The maximum you would hear is a no, and that's not usually the case. The conversation really does roll down. At least you secure advisors in the process. So I mean, thank you so much. That's very helpful. So Crunchbase it is, everyone. So the next question that we have is, it's around how to create a narrative. Do you have any resources we could use? And Lucy, this is in reference to one of your slides in the slide deck, which is about building a narrative. So this is a question from one of the participants. Yeah.
There are definitely sort of like a 101 on how to build your first fundraising deck, which is sort of like a reflection of your narrative, which is a reflection of your narrative. I shouldn't say sort of. And let me follow up with finding one of them that I think is great at sort of laying out who's in the room that's building this company. Why is this market opportunity so exciting? What is the novel approach that you're taking? And those two together kind of add up to like, what is the insight that you have that others haven't had? And that's why this will work. Then sort of, what are the brass tacks of building this business? And what does this fundraise look like? That I've oversimplified it right there. But I think if you hit those major points, you're a far way into building a really good narrative.
True, and I would second that actually. Okay, so the next question that we have is, do you have any tips, Lucy, on finding investors in other countries? I think it's probably linked to the earlier question we had in relation to networking.
Yeah, I think that that's really where you want to, I think what will be helpful is figuring out who's active in your region. It doesn't necessarily mean that they are in your region. So not just looking at investors that are present, but investors that have deployed dollars and kind of following the trail from there back out to say, okay, this investor is comfortable in my geography. It's part of what their investors expect from them. Because a lot of this is like a lot of our investments and our investment guidelines are, what are our LPs expecting us to do and what would deviate from our narrative? So you want to find folks who've been active and then follow the thread back.
Yeah, Lucy, I actually would like to ask a question in relation to this. Investors, and this is because I think it will be helpful for everyone. Do investors actually find thematic areas, for investment? And how do you know which investor is looking for what area to invest in?
So there are two types of investors. There are, or I'd say there are three. There's deeply thematic. I'm a healthcare investor. Healthcare is what I do. I'm an education investor. Education is what I do. I think those are easy to identify. They like really like have their shingle out and they're like, this is what we do. Don't tell us about anything else. There's generalist investors who will look at anything and everything. We fall into that bucket. And we are both thematic and opportunistic. And then there are investors in the middle who develop a thesis, decide, this is where I think the world of education is going. I'm going to go look for opportunities in this vein. I think those investors are really good at identifying opportunities. They're really hard from the outside in at figuring out whether at that given moment in time you fit their thesis. So I think I would err on the side of kind of treating everyone on this side as generalist. And because you don't know if there's someone in that partnership that is starting to develop a thesis that fits with your thesis. So the thematic and the generalist on this side reach out to if they fit your stage, if they fit your sector, if they aren't, saying like, we don't do any biotech. If you're biotech, you shouldn't be going there. And then if you're in an industry, go find everyone who's like an industry expert.
All right. So the next question that we have is, do you find boot camps helpful? And I'm assuming they're trying to refer towards entrepreneurship boot camps / investment. Amazing.
So this is a little tougher for me to speak to because accelerators and boot camps didn't exist when I was starting out, but I can imagine in retrospect how I think the best case for a boot camp is that it teaches you something about yourself. It gives you insight onto something that you wouldn't have thought of, kind of like brings out the contours of a particular topic. And introduces you to people who are going through the same thing you're going through. So I think in worst case, maybe you don't learn anything new, but you meet someone new and you get to riff on that topic and learn from each other. But I think, I wish in retrospect that I'd had the opportunity to go through boot camps thinking about how to build my company, how to hire people, how to raise money, how to fire people, how to transition leadership from 20 people to 40 people. There are so many points at which the one constant in entrepreneurship is that the learning curve is steep and that what you're always doing is tackling a new problem. You never get to rest on your laurels. If a problem is solved within your company, it should be because you've hired someone and put them in that spot. So I think boot camps can be incredibly valuable.
I would definitely second you on that. And I think in regards to, because you're talking about investment, I think investment readiness boot camps, they add a great deal, especially to the confidence of women entrepreneurs, respect to Pakistan, and I'm sure everywhere else across the globe for that matter.
And that's a really amazing opportunity for all that practice that we're talking about, which, your family only wants to hear your pitch so many times.
I agree, definitely. Yes. Okay, so the next question, and Lucy, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the question itself as well. If your startup is a one-person show, what would you recommend including in your team slide?
Then your team slide is your bio. It is, and if you have, this could also be where you highlight any advisors, formal or informal, that you have been working with in order to hone your idea and show your ability to, like we were saying, if they're industry experts that you should be working with and getting their perspective. But if it is just you, then you can put that slide at the back, you can put that slide at the appendix, but the important thing is you start the pitch with introducing yourself, who you are, your background, why you're doing this, why you're the best person to be doing this.
All right. We just have like a minute and a half.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll quickly try to wrap up the questions. The biggest challenge for the person who asked the question is raising the capital, perfecting my business model. Would you recommend any templates for this process?
Raising the capital and perfecting the business model. So I'm assuming that the template is related to the business model. There are a couple VCs here in the US that have been pretty prolific in sort of their content generation around everything having to do with starting a company and raising money. And I think probably my first stop would be to just go mine Andreessen Horowitz and see if they've put out any really good templates around the type of business that you're building. Because if you're building a marketplace, that's a really, really different business model than if it's a SaaS company, than if it's a direct to consumer or a healthcare company working with insurance payers. So I think it's very important what template you seek out. And I think starting with some of these like larger VCs that have content arms could be like a very good, and it's sort of like vetted high quality.
Yeah. So the next question is, how would an early stage startup approach a VC?
Yeah, I think like we said, really getting the short blurb about what you do. When a company sends me like 5 paragraphs about what they do, I'm like, do you know what you do? The greatest companies in the world, you could write a very short paragraph about. So you can write a short paragraph about your company, I guarantee you. Your idea is when it's really clarified and crystallized, it can be punchy. That matched with, here's why I think you are a good person for me to be reaching out to. Short, sweet, succinct. And I don't care if you try and land in my inbox 10 times and you only get there once, it's fine. You can guess at people's emails. They don't make it too hard. And I think, remember that VCs, investors, angels are in the business of looking for opportunities. That is our job. And so it is never offensive or the wrong thing to do to put an opportunity in front of an investor.
Absolutely. I mean, folks, we all have Lucy here with us. Right after the session ends, I think you should be heading out and, sending her request on LinkedIn to begin with. That's how you start coaching VCs, to say the least. So I would definitely agree with that, Lucy. And I mean, I did happen to drop you a note on LinkedIn. Just
great, perfect.
Yeah, I mean, this is how things work, and I would highly encourage all the startups over here to do something similar. Okay, so just very quickly, the last question: do you think advertisement is important for fundraising? If yes, which is the best platform for advertisement?
I don't think advertisement is the best avenue for investment. I don't think you need to spend dollars. I don't think that's going to be where you get noticed. I think it's, unfortunately and fortunately, it's going to be the investment of your time, finding the right introductions, and maybe asking, uncomfortable questions like, is there anyone you want to introduce me to? And, putting ideas in other people's minds. I often say to folks that you should start talking about the fact that you will fundraise a couple months before you do, to put it on, you want your network to know that it's coming. So I think that's your advertisement.
Absolutely. And as I think we've been talking about it, so many times during the session today, reaching out to people and then word of mouth, because you happen to be an asset that people would like to invest in. And the company comes as a number 2 over here.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a person, right? So
yep.
I would actually agree. And I think through that and through word of mouth, of course, you would start building your network and you would start securing sponsors and mentors, if you get lucky in the process as well.
Yes.
And Lucy, with that, I have to say this was extremely insightful. I learned so much from you today, and I hope we stay in touch. Thank you so much, so much for this highly insightful session. Everybody, I would like to mention what exactly is happening in Pakistan before I introduce our next speaker. We have raised over $228 million in investment in just the first 8 months of 2021 this year. And this is more than what we raised last year, which amounted to 77 million in 2020. And I think we're living in very exciting times because, despite COVID, and I think COVID has been a great opportunity, as Lucy also spoke about this, because, somebody posed the question about, being virtual, meeting investors virtually. I think it has opened international doors of investment. And this is exactly what we're getting to see. Having said that, thank you so much, Lucy.
Thank you, Maryam, and thank you everyone who put so much time and effort into organizing this. And thank you everyone for the amazing questions. That was wonderful.
Thank you so much. Up next, I'm very, very happy to introduce our next speaker. And we happen to have here with us today our Public Affairs Officer, Raymond Castillo. Raymond Castillo has been in the United States Embassy of Pakistan in the Public Affairs section since October 2020. And before that, before moving to Pakistan, he served as the press attaché at the US Embassy Kyiv. And before joining the Department of State, he spent 11 good years at NASA, where he was the executive producer of NASA Television. Without further ado, I would like to hand it over to him. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much, Maryam. And good evening, women entrepreneurs and our distinguished guests. Assalamu alaikum. I'm honored to speak with you this evening, and I'm humbled to be part of the Entrepreneurship Innovation and Growth series. I hope you know that the U.S. Embassy in Islamabad is proud to sponsor this event to help empower women entrepreneurs to grow their business and reach their full potential. Promoting gender equity and equality is a longstanding cornerstone of U.S. foreign policy. And the United States is also committed to economic inclusion of Pakistani women entrepreneurs because you are critical to economic growth of Pakistan. Through this series, we aim to equip you with some of the tools to overcome the challenges associated with building a successful business. It's inspiring to connect with such outstanding female entrepreneurs dedicated to transforming their business ideas into reality and contributing to the economic prosperity of Pakistan. And since the United States is Pakistan's largest export market, both our nations gain when Pakistan's economy is strong and thriving. I want to thank our US expert, Lucy Deland, for providing great insight on how to overcome barriers and establish a successful startup. Her experience is invaluable. We are grateful for her participation, and I myself was simply wowed listening to her. It just really impressed. Thanks also to Maryam Arshad, our entrepreneur and founder and director of Impact Dynamics, for moderating this session and lending her expertise to today's event. Maryam is an outstanding member of the Embassy Islamabad's vast alumni network of talented and successful professionals. They are our close partners. We rely on their talent, energy, and experience, and we couldn't do this sort of event without them. In addition, I must also thank Radhika Prabhu, and the entire US-Pakistan Women's Council for helping us to organize this event, as well as my colleagues at the embassy for making this event possible. And finally, I want to thank all of you in the audience for engaging and participating in this series. Your entrepreneurial spirit will push Pakistan forward. We are delighted to celebrate that spirit during this Global Entrepreneurship Week. So before we sign out, I've got just one thought from my heart. I'm a father of two daughters, one a recent university graduate and one who is looking at pursuing business. And I certainly hope that she has great mentors and people like we've met tonight who can give her advice when she decides to start her own business. Before you sign out, please complete the brief survey found in the chat window, and it will also be on your screen when you log off. The results of this survey will help us to improve our programming so we can tailor future presentations to your interests. Thank you again, and have a wonderful evening. Good night.